I pulled my beat-up 2006 Honda Civic into the circular driveway of Uncle Robert's mansion, watching as my cousins stepped out of their gleaming BMW and Tesla. The contrast couldn't have been more obvious. Sarah emerged from her white Model S, wearing a designer coat that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, while Brandon adjusted his expensive suit jacket as he locked his midnight blue sedan. They both turned to stare at my rusted vehicle, with barely concealed amusement dancing in their eyes. The familiar knot of dread twisted in my stomach as I gathered my courage and stepped onto the pristine cobblestone. The moment I walked through the mahogany front doors, I was struck by the overwhelming opulence surrounding me. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow patterns across marble floors, and original oil paintings lined the hallway leading to the dining room. Uncle Robert's voice boomed from the kitchen as he discussed his latest real estate acquisition with someone on the phone, while Aunt Patricia's laughter echoed from the living room where she was showing off photographs from her recent Mediterranean cruise. I smoothed down my simple black sweater from Target and adjusted my plain jeans, feeling underdressed among the sea of designer labels that would soon fill this space. My reflection in the polished silver mirror by the entrance showed exactly what my family expected to see Imogene, the struggling relative, who never quite managed to get her life together after her divorce 2 years ago. "Well, look who finally made it!" Sarah called out as she swept into the foyer, her Louboutin heels clicking against the marble. Her voice carried that particular tone I had grown to dread sweet on the surface, but laced with condescension underneath. "I wasn't sure you'd have enough gas money to make the drive out here." Brandon appeared beside her, checking his brand-new Rolex Submariner with obvious satisfaction. The gold caught the light as he made an exaggerated show of winding the crown. "Speaking of transportation, Imogene, are you still taking the bus everywhere? I heard the city transit system has been having some delays lately." Heat flushed my cheeks as other family members began filtering into the space. Cousin Jennifer emerged from the powder room, her Hermes bag swinging from her arm as she joined the growing circle around me. Uncle Robert's teenage son, Tyler, bounded down the curved staircase, his designer sneakers squeaking against the steps. "Actually, I drove myself," I replied quietly, gesturing toward the window where my Honda sat like a rusty eyesore among the luxury vehicles. "Oh, honey," Aunt Patricia chimed in, appearing with a wine glass in her manicured hand. "That old thing is still running. You really should let Robert help you find something more reliable. And safer, too, I imagine." The group moved toward the dining room, and I found myself swept along with them. The massive table had been set with bone china that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and fresh flowers from some exclusive florist created centerpieces that filled the air with an almost overwhelming fragrance. As we took our seats, Uncle Robert claimed the head of the table while directing everyone else to their designated spots. I ended up between my parents, grateful for their quiet support, even though I could see the tension in my father David's shoulders and the worried expression creasing my mother's forehead. "So, Imogene," Uncle Robert began cutting into his prime rib with surgical precision, "how are things at the coffee shop, still pulling those early morning shifts?" The question was innocent enough on the surface, but delivered with the kind of tone typically reserved for discussing someone's unfortunate medical condition. Every face around the table turned toward me with varying degrees of curiosity and pity. "I enjoy the work," I answered, simply taking a small bite of the perfectly prepared vegetables on my plate. "Oh, but surely you're looking for something more permanent." Aunt Patricia leaned forward, her diamond earrings catching the chandelier light. "Something with benefits and a real salary. I mean, at your age, you should be thinking about retirement planning and building equity." Jennifer nodded enthusiastically, her recently refreshed blonde highlights shimmering as she moved. "I just got another promotion at the marketing firm. The signing bonus alone was enough to cover my down payment on the condo in downtown. Have you thought about going back to school, Imogene? There are community college programs that might help you develop some marketable skills." My fingers tightened around my fork, but I kept my expression neutral. Under the table, I felt the weight of my watch against my wrist, hidden beneath the sleeve of my deliberately modest sweater. Brandon cleared his throat importantly the way he always did when preparing to bestow his wisdom upon lesser mortals. You know, cousin, there's no shame in admitting you need help. After the divorce and everything, it's understandable that you might be struggling to get back on your feet. The economy hasn't been kind to people without specialized education or professional networks. That's so true, Sarah added, dabbing her lips with the cloth napkin before continuing. I was just telling my personal shopper about how difficult it must be for people who don't have family connections or inherited advantages. Some people just have to work so much harder for everything. Tyler, Uncle Robert's son, looked up from his phone where he had been scrolling through social media. Wait, is Aunt Imogene actually poor? Like actually poor, Tyler? Uncle Robert's wife, Michelle, scolded, though not with any real heat in her voice. Don't be rude. Your aunt is just going through a transitional period in her life. The conversation continued swirling around me as if I were an abstract concept rather than a person sitting right there listening to every word. They discussed my situation with the detached clinical interest typically reserved for case studies or charity recipients. When I reached across the table for the salt shaker, my sleeve rode up slightly, exposing just a sliver of the metal band around my wrist. The movement was subtle, barely noticeable, but Brandon's sharp eyes caught the flash of something expensive looking. "Nice watch, cousin," he said with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Is that one of those knockoff designer pieces from the street vendors downtown? I've heard they're getting pretty good at making convincing fakes these days." The entire table erupted in uncomfortable laughter, the kind that people use to fill awkward silences when someone has said something inappropriately cruel, but nobody wants to directly call them out on it. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat, while my father's jaw tightened visibly. I simply smiled and pulled my sleeve back down, saying nothing as the conversation moved on to other topics. But something had shifted in the room's energy, a tiny crack in the foundation of their assumptions about me. The main course arrived with all the ceremony Uncle Robert's household staff could muster: perfectly carved turkey glazed ham and an array of side dishes that belonged in a magazine spread rather than a family dinner. As plates were filled and wine glasses refilled, the conversation turned toward everyone's recent accomplishments and acquisitions. Sarah pulled out her newest iPhone, scrolling through carefully curated photos from her latest shopping expedition. "You simply must see these shoes I picked up at Neiman Marcus last week," she gushed, angling the screen toward the table. The salesperson said they only received 6 pairs in this particular shade of burgundy. The images showed rows of designer boxes, each containing footwear that cost more than many people's weekly paychecks. Sarah swiped through photo after photo, providing detailed commentary about each purchase as if she were conducting a master class in luxury consumption. "The craftsmanship is just extraordinary." She continued, zooming in on the delicate stitching of a pair of pumps. "Of course, some people wouldn't appreciate the subtle differences between genuine Italian leather and the synthetic materials they use in department store brands." Her eyes flicked toward me briefly before returning to her phone, the implication clear enough that even Tyler picked up on the subtext and snickered into his mashed potatoes. Brandon, not to be outdone, rolled up his sleeves to display his new Cartier cufflinks alongside the Rolex. "These were actually a gift to myself for closing the Henderson account," he announced, turning his wrists to catch the light. "The commission on that deal alone was enough to cover both of these and still have plenty left over for Jennifer's birthday present." "Speaking of presents," Jennifer chimed in, "Brandon surprised me with the most incredible weekend in Napa Valley. We stayed at this exclusive resort where you literally need connections just to get a reservation. The wine cellar tour alone cost more than most people spend on their entire vacation." Uncle Robert nodded approvingly as he carved another slice of turkey. It's important to invest in experiences, not just material possessions. Patricia and I have been discussing our next cruise, haven't we, dear? We're thinking about the Mediterranean again, but this time in one of those private suites with the personal butler service. "Oh, that sounds divine," Aunt Patricia practically purred. "Remember last time when we had that lovely balcony overlooking the Aegean Sea? The sunrise views were absolutely breathtaking. Of course, those kinds of accommodations aren't for everyone. You really do get what you pay for when it comes to luxury travel." Michelle joined the conversation describing their recent renovation of the guest house. "We decided to go with that interior designer everyone's been raving about. You know, the one who did the Kardashian house. The budget was substantial, but the results speak for themselves." I continued eating quietly, cutting my food into small, precise pieces, while the catalog of wealth continued around me. My parents exchanged worried glances across the table, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. "Imogene," Uncle Robert said suddenly, his voice cutting through the chatter with artificial warmth, "have you been able to take any vacations lately, even just a weekend getaway or something modest?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Every face turned toward me expectantly, waiting to hear about my presumably limited travel experiences. "I prefer staying local," I replied calmly, taking a sip of water from my crystal glass. "Oh, of course," Sarah said with exaggerated understanding. "Staycations can be so economical. There's nothing wrong with exploring your own neighborhood when international travel isn't in the budget." Tyler looked up from his plate with genuine curiosity. "But don't you want to see other countries and stuff? I mean, we went to Paris last summer and it was pretty cool. The food was weird, but the shopping was amazing." Tyler. His father warned mildly, "Not everyone has the same opportunities we do. It's important to be grateful for our advantages and sensitive to others who might be in different circumstances." The condescension in his voice was so thick it was practically tangible. He was using me as a teaching moment for his son about appreciating privilege, discussing my financial limitations as if they were established fact rather than assumption. Brandon leaned back in his chair, his newly filled wine glass glinting in the chandelier light. "You know, Imogene, if you ever want advice about building wealth or making smart investments, I'd be happy to share some strategies that have worked well for me. It's never too late to start planning for the future, even if you're starting from behind." "That's very generous of you," Jennifer added, "though I suppose the challenge is having enough disposable income to actually invest in the first place. It's one of those situations where you need money to make money, if you know what I mean." I nodded politely, adjusting the position of my watch beneath my sleeve. The weight of it against my wrist felt reassuring, a secret anchor in the storm of their assumptions. When I stood to help clear some of the dinner plates, Brandon deliberately shifted his chair backward, creating an obstacle in my path. I had to step sideways to avoid bumping into him, and in the process, my sleeve rode up again as I balanced the stack of dishes. This time, the light from the chandelier caught the watch face, directly creating an unmistakable sparkle that could only come from genuine diamonds. The brief flash was impossible to miss, and Sarah's sharp intake of breath indicated she had noticed something significant. Her eyes narrowed as she stared at my wrist, clearly trying to process what she had just seen. The confusion on her face was evident as she struggled to reconcile the expensive-looking timepiece with her assumptions about my financial situation. Brandon noticed his girlfriend's sudden change in expression and followed her gaze to my arm, but by then my sleeve had fallen back into place, hiding the watch once again. "Everything all right?" I asked innocently, continuing toward the kitchen with the dishes. "Oh, yes," Sarah replied quickly, though her voice sounded strained. "Everything's fine." But as I walked away, I could feel both of their eyes burning into my back, and I heard Sarah lean over to whisper urgently in Brandon's ear. The seed of doubt had been planted, and I knew it would only be a matter of time before their curiosity overcame their assumptions. Dessert service began with the same theatrical precision that had characterized the entire evening. Uncle Robert's staff brought out individual chocolate soufflés, accompanied by handmade vanilla bean ice cream, each portion artfully plated and garnished with gold leaf that caught the dining room's warm lighting. As the family savored their desserts, Uncle Robert cleared his throat importantly and stood tapping his wine glass with his knife to gather everyone's attention. His face wore the expression of a man about to announce something particularly magnanimous. I want to share some exciting news with all of you. He began, his chest puffing out with obvious pride. Patricia and I have decided to establish the Morrison Family Educational Scholarship Fund. We'll be contributing $50,000 annually to help deserving family members pursue higher education or professional development opportunities. Murmurs of approval rippled around the table as family members nodded enthusiastically. Michelle clasped her hands together with delight, while Sarah and Jennifer exchanged knowing looks. Of course. Uncle Robert continued, his eyes sweeping across the assembled faces before landing directly on me. We'll need to establish criteria for eligibility based on financial need and demonstrated commitment to self-improvement. The goal is to help family members who are struggling to get back on their feet and build better lives for themselves. The silence that followed was deafening. Every person at that table understood exactly who this announcement was directed toward, even though my name hadn't been explicitly mentioned. I could feel the weight of their collective pity pressing down on me like a suffocating blanket. What a wonderful idea! Aunt Patricia chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. It's so important to help family members who find themselves in challenging circumstances. Education really is the key to breaking cycles of financial difficulty. Brandon nodded sagely, setting down his dessert spoon with deliberate ceremony. I think this could make a real difference for someone who's been unable to establish a stable career path. Maybe fund some technical training or certification programs that lead to actual employment opportunities. Oh, that's perfect, Jennifer added enthusiastically. There are so many programs available now for people who want to develop marketable skills. Computer training, medical assistant certification, that sort of thing. Very practical and focused on real-world applications. Sarah leaned forward eagerly, her designer bracelet jangling as she gestured. We should set up an application process with essays and interviews. That way the recipient really has to demonstrate their commitment to changing their situation. No handouts, but genuine investment in someone's future. Tyler looked around the table with teenage confusion before understanding dawned on his face. Wait, are you guys talking about giving money to Aunt Imogene because she's poor? Tyler. Michelle scolded sharply, though her embarrassment seemed more focused on his bluntness than his accuracy. We don't use that word. Aunt Imogene is simply going through a transitional period. But she is right, Tyler persisted, looking genuinely puzzled. I mean, she works at a coffee shop and drives that old car. Mom always says we should help people who don't have as much as we do. The adults shifted uncomfortably as Tyler's innocent observations laid bare what they had all been dancing around. Uncle Robert cleared his throat again, attempting to regain control of the conversation. The point is, he said firmly, that this scholarship fund represents our commitment to supporting family members who want to improve their circumstances. We believe in giving people the tools they need to succeed rather than simply enabling dependency. My mother's chair scraped against the floor as she stood abruptly, her face flushed with emotion. I need to use the restroom, she announced tersely, practically fleeing from the dining room before anyone could respond. My father David's hands were clenched into fists on the table, his knuckles white with barely controlled anger. I could see a muscle twitching in his jaw as he struggled to maintain his composure in the face of his family's casual cruelty. The application deadline should probably be sometime in January. Aunt Patricia continued, apparently oblivious to the emotional devastation she was witnessing. That gives people time to really think about their goals and put together a compelling case for why they deserve the funding. Absolutely, Sarah agreed. And we should require financial documentation too, bank statements, tax returns, that sort of thing. We want to make sure the money goes to someone who genuinely needs it, not someone who's just looking for a handout. Throughout this entire exchange, I had remained perfectly still, slowly rotating my watch around my wrist beneath the table. The familiar weight of it grounded me as their words washed over me like a tide of condescension and pity. Something strange was happening to my emotional state. Instead of the usual shame and hurt that typically accompanied these family gatherings, I felt an odd sense of calm settling over me. A small smile began tugging at the corners of my mouth as I contemplated the irony of the situation unfolding around me. "That sounds like a very generous program," I said quietly, my voice cutting through their excited planning session. "I'm sure whoever receives the scholarship will be very grateful for the opportunity." My response seemed to surprise them. They had clearly expected tears, gratitude, or perhaps defensive anger. The serene smile on my face was not part of their anticipated script. Brandon frowned slightly, studying my expression with growing confusion. "You seem different tonight, Imogene, more relaxed than usual." "Do I?" I asked innocently, taking another bite of my soufflé. "I suppose I am feeling rather at peace with my life these days." Sarah was still staring at my wrist, clearly bothered by something she couldn't quite identify. When I reached for my water glass, she leaned forward slightly, trying to get a better view of whatever had caught her attention earlier. "Imogene," she said carefully, "that watch you're wearing, where did you get it?" The question cut through all other conversation like a blade. Suddenly, every eye was focused on my left wrist, though the timepiece remained hidden beneath my sleeve. "This old thing?" I asked with deliberate casualness, pushing my sleeve up just far enough to reveal the edge of the band. "I've had it for a while now." Sarah's sharp intake of breath was audible across the table. Even from her limited view, she could see enough detail to know that what I was wearing was not some department store accessory. She immediately grabbed Brandon's arm, her fingernails digging into his expensive suit jacket as she whispered frantically in his ear. His eyes widened as he processed whatever she was telling him, and both of them stared at my wrist with expressions of complete disbelief. The shift in their demeanor was palpable, and other family members began to take notice. Uncle Robert looked back and forth between his nephew and niece, clearly sensing that something significant had just occurred. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his authoritative voice demanding an explanation. But before either Sarah or Brandon could respond, my father David leaned forward in his chair, his experienced eye finally catching a clear glimpse of what had captured their attention. As someone who had spent decades working in luxury retail management, he knew exactly what he was looking at. The color drained from his face as recognition dawned, and his hands began to tremble against the white tablecloth. My father David had always possessed an eye for luxury goods that bordered on the supernatural. 25 years of managing high-end retail establishments had taught him to spot authentic craftsmanship from across a room and to identify specific manufacturers, model numbers, and even production years with startling accuracy. As he leaned forward in his chair, his decades of expertise kicked into overdrive. From his new angle, he could see not just the edge of my watch band, but a portion of the distinctive case design that made his breath catch in his throat. "Dear God," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the clink of dessert spoons against china. Uncle Robert paused mid-sentence in his continued discussion of scholarship criteria, noticing his brother's sudden change in demeanor. "David, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." My father's hands were shaking now as he tried to process what his trained eye was telling him. He had sold watches to celebrities, professional athletes, and oil executives. He had handled timepieces worth more than most people's houses. And what he was glimpsing on his daughter's wrist was something that belonged in a private collector's vault, not on the arm of someone his family believed to be struggling financially. "Imogene," he said slowly, his voice cracking with emotion, "would you mind showing us your watch?" The request hung in the air like a live wire. Every conversation stopped dead as family members turned their attention toward this unexpected development. Sarah and Brandon exchanged meaningful glances, clearly anticipating vindication of their suspicions. I set down my dessert spoon with deliberate care and looked directly at my father. In his eyes, I could see not just recognition, but a growing understanding of the game I had been playing with his siblings for the past 2 years. "Are you sure you want to see it?" I asked gently, giving him one last opportunity to remain in comfortable ignorance. He nodded, though his hands continued to tremble as he waited for confirmation of what his experience was telling him. Slowly, I pushed my sleeve up my forearm, revealing the full face of my Richard Mille RM 5701 skull. The distinctive carbon fiber case caught the chandelier light, while the diamond-set skull motif gleamed against the complex mechanical movement visible through the transparent dial. The effect on the room was immediate and devastating. Uncle Robert's wine glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against his china plate and sending dark red liquid spreading across the pristine white tablecloth. Aunt Patricia's mouth fell open in a perfect circle of shock, while Jennifer made a small choking sound and began fanning herself with her napkin. But it was my father's reaction that truly captured the magnitude of the moment. His chair scraped backward as he half stood, pointing at my wrist with a shaking hand. "That's a $1 million limited edition watch," he announced to the stunned room, his voice carrying the authority of someone who knew exactly what he was talking about. Richard Mille only made 28 pieces in that specific configuration. I helped a tech billionaire acquire number 14 3 years ago. Uncle Robert laughed nervously, the sound harsh and artificial in the suddenly tense atmosphere. "Come on, David, that's impossible. It has to be some kind of replica. A very good one, maybe, but certainly not authentic." My father shook his head slowly, his professional expertise overriding any desire to maintain family harmony. "Look at the case construction. See how the carbon fiber layers are oriented. That's TPT carbon, a proprietary material that Richard Mille developed exclusively for their most exclusive pieces. You can't fake that texture or the way it interacts with light." He gestured toward the movement visible through the dial. "And that skeleton architecture with the skull motif. That's not just decoration. Every one of those components is individually crafted and assembled by hand. The tolerance requirements alone make counterfeiting impossible at any price point that would make economic sense." Brandon had gone completely pale, his earlier confidence evaporating as the implications sank in. But that's impossible," he stammered. "She works at a coffee shop, she drives a Honda Civic. She can't afford groceries half the time." "Who told you I can't afford groceries?" I asked quietly, genuinely curious about the source of that particular assumption. The question hung unanswered as family members stared at each other, suddenly realizing that most of their beliefs about my financial situation were based on speculation rather than actual knowledge. Sarah was practically hyperventilating as she processed what this meant about all the cruel comments she had made throughout the evening. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered, her voice high and strained. "Where would you even get something like that? You can't just walk into a jewelry store and buy a watch that expensive." My father nodded grimly. "She's right about that. Richard Mille doesn't sell to just anyone. You need to be on waiting lists for years, sometimes decades. They vet their customers extensively, and the retail price on that specific model was actually closer to $1.2 million when it was released." Tyler, bless his teenage heart, cut straight through the adult confusion with typical adolescent directness. "So wait, Aunt Imogene is actually rich, like really rich." The question everyone was thinking but afraid to ask hung in the air like a challenge. I looked around the table at their shocked faces, taking in the full scope of their emotional transformation from pity to bewilderment. "I suppose that depends on how you define rich," I replied, calmly adjusting the watch's position on my wrist. "But I'm certainly not poor." Michelle had recovered enough to find her voice, though it came out as barely more than a croak. "How is this possible? We all assumed." "You assumed a lot of things," I agreed pleasantly, most of them incorrect. Uncle Robert's face had progressed through several shades of red before settling on a deep purple that suggested his blood pressure had reached dangerous levels. "This is ridiculous," he blustered, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Even if that watch is authentic, which I still doubt, there must be some explanation. Maybe it's borrowed or rented for some special occasion." My father turned to stare at his brother with barely concealed disgust. "Robert, I've been in this business my entire adult life. That watch has been professionally fitted to Imogene's wrist. Look at the bracelet adjustment and the way it sits against her skin. Nobody spends that kind of money on a temporary rental. The truth was beginning to dawn on them like a slow-motion avalanche, and the expressions around the table shifted from confusion to horror as they realized what this meant about their behavior throughout the evening. The silence that followed my father's expert authentication stretched on for what felt like an eternity. I could practically hear the gears grinding in their minds as they struggled to reconcile this new reality with everything they thought they knew about me. Finally, Uncle Robert found his voice, though it came out as more of a croak than his usual authoritative tone. "All right, Imogene, I think we all deserve an explanation here. If you can afford a watch worth more than most people's houses, why have you been living like a normal person?" I suggested helpfully when he struggled to find appropriate words. "Like someone who needs help." Aunt Patricia finished for him, her face flushed with what I suspected was equal parts embarrassment and anger. I leaned back in my chair, finally ready to end the charade that had consumed the last 2 years of my life. Because I wanted to see who you really were when you thought I had nothing to offer you. Jennifer's designer handbag slipped from her lap and hit the floor with a dull thud, but she didn't seem to notice. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that for 2 years you've all treated me like a charity case," I said calmly, my voice carrying none of the anger I probably should have felt. "You've made jokes about my clothes, my car, my job, my living situation. You've offered me your cast-off belongings and suggested I apply for financial assistance programs. You've discussed my poverty in front of your children and used me as an example of what not to become." Brandon's mouth opened and closed several times before any sound emerged. But we were trying to help you. We thought you needed support after the divorce." "Did you?" I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. "Or did you enjoy feeling superior to someone in your family? Did it make you feel better about your own lives to have a relative you could look down on?" The accusation hit the table like a physical blow. Sarah began shaking her head frantically, as if she could deny the truth through sheer force of will. "That's not fair," she protested, though her voice lacked conviction. "We were being supportive. We offered to help with job connections and financial planning. We included you in family events even when we knew you might feel out of place." "You're right," I agreed, surprising her. "You did include me, as the family failure, as the cautionary tale, as the person everyone else could feel grateful they weren't." Tyler looked around the table with the confused expression of someone trying to understand adult complexity. "But if Aunt Imogene isn't poor, why did she pretend to be? That's weird, right?" Out of the mouths of babes, his question cut straight to the heart of what everyone was thinking, but afraid to voice. "I didn't pretend to be poor, Tyler," I explained gently. "I just didn't advertise my wealth. I kept living in my same apartment, driving my same car, and working at the same job because I wanted to see how my family treated someone they believed to be less fortunate than themselves." Uncle Robert's face had reached an alarming shade of crimson. "That's manipulative and dishonest," he declared, his voice rising with indignation. "You deliberately deceived us." "Did I asked, pulling my phone from my purse. "Let me check something." I opened my voice memo application and scrolled through the recordings I'd been making throughout the evening. The family watched in growing horror as I selected the file from dinner and pressed play. Uncle Robert's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. "The goal is to help family members who are struggling to get back on their feet and build better lives for themselves." I paused the recording. "That was you about 15 minutes ago announcing your scholarship fund for struggling family members. Should I play the part where Sarah suggested setting up a GoFundMe page for my situation?" Sarah's face went completely white. "You've been recording us?" "I've been documenting how my family treats someone they believe to be in financial distress," I corrected, "and the results have been quite illuminating." I scrolled through my phone, finding another recording from a family gathering 6 months earlier. Would you like to hear the conversation from Easter dinner, where Brandon explained to his friends that I was the family example of why education matters? Or perhaps the recording from Tyler's birthday party, where Aunt Patricia told the other mothers that some people just can't seem to get their lives together after major life changes. The room had gone completely silent except for the sound of Michelle's rapid breathing and what sounded like Tyler whispering, "Holy crap," under his breath. Now, to answer your original question about how I can afford nice things, I continued setting my phone back on the table. I'm a freelance software developer specializing in mobile application architecture. 2 years ago, I designed an app called Quick Sync that streamlined inventory management for small businesses. 3 months after I launched it, I received a $15 million acquisition offer from a major tech company. The number hit the room like a physical force. Jennifer actually gasped audibly while Brandon's face went through several expressions before settling on something resembling nausea. $15 million, Uncle Robert repeated weakly. $15 million, I confirmed. After taxes, legal fees, and business expenses, I netted approximately $11.2 million. I've been investing wisely ever since, so the current total is somewhat higher. Aunt Patricia made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. But the coffee shop... I kept working there because I enjoyed the normal human interaction, I explained. It's remarkable how differently people treat you when they think you need the job versus when they think you're doing it for fun. My coworkers there have been more genuinely supportive and kind than my own family. And the car, Sarah asked faintly. I like my Honda. It's reliable, economical, and it doesn't attract unwanted attention. Plus, it's been an excellent tool for observing how people judge others based on material possessions. I stood up from my chair, the expensive watch catching the light as I moved. I bought this particular timepiece to celebrate the acquisition of my company. It was an indulgence, certainly, but one I could easily afford. I've been wearing it to family gatherings for 8 months, waiting to see if anyone would notice that something didn't quite fit with your assumptions about my circumstances. The family sat in stunned silence, processing the complete reversal of everything they thought they knew. But I wasn't finished yet. There's something else you should know, I said, picking up my phone again. I've already made a $15 million donation to a financial literacy program for underprivileged families. The announcement will be published in tomorrow's newspaper, along with a dedication explaining that the donation was made in honor of the importance of treating all family members with dignity and respect, regardless of their economic circumstances. Uncle Robert's wine-stained face went completely white as the implications of public exposure dawned on him. The silence that followed my announcement was deafening. I could see the wheels turning in their minds as they processed not just the revelation of my wealth, but the implications of the recording I had just played and the public donation that would soon make headlines. Uncle Robert was the first to break his business owner instincts kicking in as he realized the potential damage to his professional reputation. Imogene, surely we can discuss this privately. Family matters should stay within the family. Should they? I asked, genuinely curious about his sudden change in perspective, because for the past 2 years you've had no problem discussing my supposed financial struggles with your business associates, your country club friends, and apparently anyone else who would listen. Aunt Patricia began wringing her hands, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light as she gestured frantically. We were concerned about you. We wanted to help. If we said anything inappropriate, it came from a place of love and worry. Love and worry, I repeated thoughtfully. Is that what you call it when Sarah posted on social media about having to support struggling family members, or when Brandon used me as a punchline at his office Christmas party? Both cousins visibly flinched at the accuracy of my observations. The fact that I knew about these incidents clearly surprised them, though they shouldn't have been shocked that word had gotten back to me eventually. How did you... Sarah started to ask, then stopped herself. Know about your social media posts, I finished. Or Brandon's jokes at work. I may not move in your social circles anymore, but we have mutual friends and acquaintances. People talk especially when someone they know is being publicly humiliated by their own family. Jennifer found her voice, though it came out much smaller than her usual confident tone. We never meant to humiliate you. We honestly thought we were being supportive. Supportive, I mused, scrolling through my phone to another recording. Let me play something for you. This time it was Jennifer's voice that filled the room, recorded at a family barbecue 3 months earlier. It's just sad you know someone with so much potential who just can't seem to get it together. Maybe if she tried harder or made better choices, she wouldn't be in this situation. Jennifer's face crumpled as she heard her own words played back to her. You were just what? I asked gently, trying to help because that didn't sound like help to me. That sounded like judgment. Tyler, who had been unusually quiet during this entire exchange, suddenly spoke up with characteristic teenage bluntness. So you guys were basically being jerks to Aunt Imogene because you thought she was poor. That's really messed up. Tyler. Michelle scolded automatically, though her heart clearly wasn't in it. No, Mom, it is messed up. Tyler continued, looking around the table with genuine confusion. I mean, if someone in your family needs help, you help them. You don't make fun of them or treat them like they're stupid. That's like basic human decency. The wisdom of a 17-year-old cut through all the adult justifications and excuses like a knife through butter. Out of everyone at that table, Tyler was the only one who immediately grasped the fundamental wrongness of what had been happening. Uncle Robert's face had progressed beyond red into a concerning purple territory. This whole situation is ridiculous, he blustered, though his voice lacked its earlier authority. You engineered this entire scenario to make us look bad. You manipulated us. I manipulated you into revealing your true characters, I corrected. I didn't make you say cruel things about me. I didn't force you to treat me with condescension and pity. I simply gave you the opportunity to show who you really are when you think someone can't benefit you in return. Brandon had gone completely silent, staring at his expensive Rolex as if it had suddenly become a millstone around his wrist. The irony wasn't lost on any of us that he had been bragging about a $20,000 watch to someone wearing something worth 50 times that amount. The recording, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. Are you going to share it with people? I considered her question carefully before answering. That depends entirely on what happens next. What do you mean? Uncle Robert demanded, though his bluster had deflated considerably. I mean that you have a choice to make, I explained. You can continue being the kind of people who judge family members based on their perceived wealth and treat those you consider beneath you with cruelty and condescension. Or you can recognize that your behavior has been unacceptable and make genuine efforts to change. Aunt Patricia leaned forward desperately. Of course we want to change. We had no idea we were being hurtful. We thought we were helping. Did you? I asked skeptically, because helping doesn't usually involve quite so much public humiliation and private mockery. My mother chose that moment to return from the bathroom, her eyes still red-rimmed from crying. She took one look at the tense scene around the table and immediately sensed that something significant had occurred in her absence. What's happening? She asked quietly, reclaiming her seat beside my father. Your daughter has just revealed that she's a multi-millionaire, Uncle Robert said bitterly, as if my success was somehow a personal affront to him. My mother blinked in confusion, looking back and forth between my face and my father's shocked expression. What? I reached over and took her hand gently. Remember that app I was working on after the divorce? The one you said you were proud of me for pursuing even though you didn't understand the technical aspects? She nodded slowly. It sold for $15 million, Mom. I've been financially secure for 2 years now. The joy that spread across her face was immediately followed by confusion as she processed the implications. But why didn't you tell us? Why have you been living like a normal person? I finished, because I wanted to see how my family treated someone they thought was struggling, and unfortunately the results have been rather disappointing. My mother looked around the table, taking in the guilty expressions and uncomfortable body language of her in-laws. Understanding dawned in her eyes as she realized what had been happening during her absence from family gatherings. "You've been cruel to her," she said quietly, her voice carrying a note of steel I rarely heard from my gentle mother. "You've been treating my daughter like a charity case." "We were trying to help," Aunt Patricia protested weakly. "No," my mother replied firmly. "Helping would have been offering emotional support, job connections, or genuine assistance. What you've been doing is using her situation to feel superior about your own lives." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge, and none of them seemed able to formulate a defense. The aftermath of my revelation settled over the dining room like dust after an explosion. Family members sat in various states of shock, shame, and confusion, processing the complete reversal of everything they thought they knew about me, and more importantly, about themselves. My father, David, was the first to break the silence, his voice carrying a mixture of pride and profound sadness. "Sweetheart, I'm incredibly proud of your success, but I'm heartbroken that you felt you needed to hide it from your own family." "I didn't hide it to hurt you or Mom," I assured him quickly. "I hid it because I needed to understand something important about the people in my life. I needed to see who would treat me with kindness and respect regardless of what they thought I could offer them in return." Uncle Robert shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his earlier bluster completely deflated. "And what did you discover?" I looked around the table, taking in each face carefully before responding. "I discovered that my co-workers at the coffee shop who earn minimum wage and struggle to make ends meet have shown me more genuine care and support than my wealthy relatives. I discovered that true character isn't revealed when people think you're successful, but when they believe you have nothing they want." Sarah had been crying quietly throughout this exchange, mascara creating dark tracks down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Imogene," she whispered. "I never realized how awful I was being. I thought I was I don't know what I thought." "You thought you were better than me," I said gently but honestly, "and that belief made you feel entitled to treat me as less than human." Brandon finally found his voice, though it came out hoarse and strained. "Can you forgive us? Is there any way to make this right?" I considered his question carefully. "Forgiveness isn't something you can earn through apologies, Brandon. It's something I give freely because holding on to anger would hurt me more than it hurts you. But making things right, that's going to require fundamental changes in how you treat people." Tyler looked up from his phone where he had been unusually quiet. "I don't get it," he said with typical teenage directness. "Why does it matter how much money someone has? Like Aunt Imogene is the same person she was an hour ago. She's still smart and funny and nice to talk to. The only thing that changed is now you know she's rich." His observation silenced the table once again. Out of all of us, Tyler was the only one who had treated me exactly the same throughout the evening, regardless of his assumptions about my financial situation. "That's exactly right, Tyler," I said warmly. "A person's worth isn't determined by their bank account or their possessions. It's determined by their character, their kindness, and how they treat others." Michelle reached over and squeezed her son's hand. "You're absolutely right, honey, and I'm proud of you for seeing that when the adults in this room lost sight of it." Jennifer had been silent for several minutes, clearly struggling with something internal. Finally, she spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "I keep thinking about all the times we excluded you from things because we assumed you couldn't afford them. The ski trips, the expensive restaurants, the shopping excursions. We told ourselves we were being considerate, but really, we were just being elitist." "That's a hard truth to face," I acknowledged, "but recognizing it is the first step toward changing it." Aunt Patricia had been wringing her hands throughout this entire conversation, and now she leaned forward with desperate urgency. "What can we do, Imogene? How do we fix this? How do we become the kind of family members you deserve?" I stood up from my chair, the weight of my expensive watch no longer feeling like a secret, but rather like a symbol of the lesson we had all learned tonight. You start by treating every person with dignity and respect, regardless of what you think they can do for you. I said simply. You stop judging people based on their clothes, their cars, their jobs, or their possessions. You remember that behind every service worker, every struggling single parent, every person you encounter who seems to have less than you, there's a human being who deserves your kindness. I slowly removed the Richard Mille from my wrist and placed it on the table in front of me. The $1 million timepiece caught the chandelier light, casting tiny rainbows across the white tablecloth. This watch doesn't define my worth any more than my Honda Civic or my Target sweater defines my lack of worth. I continued. Objects are just objects. What defines us is how we treat each other, especially when we think no one is watching or when we believe the other person can't benefit us in return. My mother had begun crying again, but these were tears of pride rather than sadness. I raised you right, she said softly. You both did, I assured my parents. You taught me that success means nothing if it comes at the expense of treating others poorly. You showed me that real wealth is measured in relationships, kindness, and the positive impact you have on the world around you. Sarah looked up from her tear-stained napkin. The donation you mentioned. The $15 million. You really gave it all away. Not all of it, I clarified. I still have plenty for my own needs and security. But yes, I donated that amount to establish literacy and financial education programs for underprivileged families. Because I learned something important over the past 2 years, having money is a privilege that comes with responsibilities. Uncle Robert's voice was barely audible when he spoke. What kind of responsibilities? The responsibility to help lift others up instead of looking down on them, I answered. The responsibility to use your advantages to make the world a little better, not to make yourself feel superior to others. The responsibility to remember that luck and circumstances play a huge role in success, and that anyone can find themselves in difficult situations regardless of their education, their work ethic, or their past achievements. I picked up my watch and slipped it back onto my wrist, but somehow it felt different now, less like a disguise and more like a reminder. I want you all to understand something, I said, looking each family member in the eye. I don't expect you to change overnight. Recognizing your prejudices and working to overcome them is a lifelong process. But I need to know that you're committed to that process before we can move forward as a family. Brandon was the first to respond. I am committed. I don't like who I was tonight. I don't like the person I've apparently been for years. I want to do better. One by one, each family member made similar commitments. Some seemed more genuine than others, but even the tentative promises felt like progress. Tyler looked around the table with something approaching admiration. This is like one of those movies where everyone learns an important lesson at the end, except it's real life, which is kind of cool. Despite everything that had happened, I found myself laughing at his observation. You're right, Tyler. Though I hope the lesson sticks better in real life than it usually does in movies. As the evening wound down and family members began making their awkward goodbyes, I felt something I hadn't experienced at a family gathering in years' hope. Not for dramatic transformation, but for gradual, meaningful change. My parents stayed behind to help with cleanup, and as we worked together in comfortable silence, my father finally spoke. I'm proud of your success, sweetheart, but I'm even prouder of the woman you've become. You could have used tonight to humiliate them, to get revenge for all the times they hurt you. Instead, you used it to teach them something valuable about themselves. Revenge would have felt good for about 5 minutes, I replied, stacking plates carefully, but it wouldn't have made any of us better people. As we drove home in my father's car, my old Honda following behind us, driven by my mother, I reflected on the evening's events. The experiment was over. The truth was revealed, and the real work of rebuilding relationships could begin. I pulled out my phone and deleted all the recordings I had made over the past 2 years. They had served their purpose as documentation, but I no longer needed them. Going forward, I would judge my family members not by their past behavior, but by their efforts to change. The watch on my wrist caught the streetlights as we drove through the quiet neighborhoods, but it no longer felt like a secret weapon or a symbol of deception. It was simply a beautiful object that I had earned through hard work and that I could enjoy without shame or pretense. Most importantly, I had learned something valuable about myself through this entire experience. True confidence doesn't come from hiding your success or flaunting your wealth. It comes from knowing that your worth as a human being exists independently of what you own or what others think of you. The coffee shop where I worked would be getting a very different employee when I returned on Monday. Not because my circumstances had changed, but because I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. I could simply be myself, successful, generous, and committed to treating every person I encountered with the dignity and respect they deserved. As we pulled into my parents' driveway, I made a mental note to have lunch with Tyler soon. In a family full of adults who had lost their way, he had remained a beacon of simple human decency. There was a lot I could learn from him about seeing people for who they really are rather than what they appear to have. The evening had ended not with dramatic confrontations or relationship-ending revelations, but with the quiet hope that comes from people recognizing their flaws and committing to growth. And sometimes, that's the most powerful transformation of all. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been judged based on your appearance or circumstances rather than your character? How do you think we can do better at treating everyone with dignity and respect, regardless of their situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more tales of personal growth and family dynamics. Don't forget to share this with someone who might need to hear this message about the true meaning of worth and success. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember that your value as a person is never determined by what you own, but by the kindness you show to others.